Okay, let's get started with Module 8, Entering Project Costs. In this particular module, we'll work with placing different cost elements into your project schedule, both costs related to resources as well as fixed costs, and we'll also look at the different views to be able to see the different cost elements within your project schedule. You want to make sure that you have the Module 8 project file open. And the first thing we'll do is we'll look at the different ways in which we can put in resource rates, which will of course give us cost because it's looking at a resource and how they're assigned to the various tasks. And the rate will obviously determine what the cost of the task is going to be. So make sure that you have that file open and saved as a different file name. So the very first thing we're going to do here is entering in resource costs, and we'll go into Steve Masters, and we'll look at the standard rate for Steve and make sure that that's placed in there. And then we're also going to look at how we can do a resource rate change, in this case based on a very specific date. So you might have a resource that is on your team that when a certain date turns, that their rate changes. Maybe they get some type of certification, or they graduate from a certain school, or they get some type of something changes within how they're as part of the team, that you need to make sure that their rate as part of a date actually changes. And so we'll do that within the resource information dialog box. We'll see that. And then we'll move on to working with cost rate tables. So within each resource that you're working with, there will be a rate table that you can go into to have different rates that you're storing. So you might have a resource that when they perform certain work for you, they're at one rate, but when they do something else, maybe more of a managerial role or even more of an in-depth technical role, that they have a different rate. And we see that quite often in the types of projects that we do. An instructor rate, for example, is different than when they're doing consulting or even when they're doing support. So they have various rates, and we want to be able to reflect that within the schedule. So we'll learn how to do that. And we'll also add a note so that if another project manager is working within our schedules, they can see why we have that different set of rates for the resource. And then we'll go in and apply some fixed costs, and we'll learn about fixed costs in the next section here. And we'll go in and we'll do that we'll not only apply the different rate, but then we'll also apply a fixed cost for a particular task. And we'll do that within the Gantt chart. And then we'll also assign a cost resource type. If you remember earlier when we were working with resources and we talked about the resource types, one of the resources that we created was a flight resource, and we associated the cost as the resource type. Well, now it's time to assign that particular resource to a task and then put in the value, put in the cost of that particular item, and in this case it's a flight. So we're going to have multiple flights through the course of the schedule, but the flights are going to be different in terms from a cost perspective. So we want to be able to put the cost in at the point of assignment, and that's what's critical, at the point of assignment. And that's what we'll do here in this exercise. And then we'll move on to the recap. Okay, you should have the Module 8 file open and renamed as a new file name. In this case, I have the my in front of my MPO7 Fund Module 8 file. And the very first thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and enter some resource costs. So let's go into the resource sheet. So that's the first thing we'll do, going into the resource sheet. And let's focus on Steve Masters here. So what you're going to want to do is to make sure you're in the Steve Masters row, and you can simply find yourself in the standard rate column right here. In the standard rate column, go ahead and type in 75, and the default is going to be hourly. So if you hit the tab key, you'll notice it just tabs over to the overtime rate, and you can see that we've applied the $75 an hour to Steve Masters. okay, for the overtime rate. So his overtime rate is going to be 100, so just type in 100 there, hit the enter key, and you've entered in the standard rate and the overtime rate for Steve Masters. Now let's go to Rob Young, and he's right underneath Steve Masters. And this time for the standard rate, what you're going to type in is 52,000, but you're going to do a /y, okay, /y, and then just hit the enter key. If it doesn't fit for you there, just spread out your column a little bit. So if you get pound signs there, it's because it didn't fit in. So if it looks very narrow like that, right, then just spread it out, making sure that you can see everything. So 52,000 for the year, and just make sure you hit the enter key there. Okay, so you can type in /D for day if they have a daily rate. Okay. Now let's go to Kim Rawls, and this time we're going to double click on Kim Rawls. So let's go ahead and do that. And looking at your resource information dialog box, a couple things that we'll do with Kim Rawls. First thing is let's go into the cost tab. So from the resource information dialog box, click in the cost tab, and for standard rate type in 20. Then you can hit the tab key, right, which registers it. Then click in the overtime, type in 30. Then you can hit the tab key, which registers it, or hit the enter key. Now what you're going to do is in the second row here for the effective date, you're going to click in the effective date. You're going to click on the drop down, and let's go find a date out in the future here. Let's do the April 5th. Okay, so on April 5th of 2010, and then click in your standard rate. Essentially what's going to happen is Kim Rawls is going to have a rate change. So go ahead and type in 22, right? Then you can hit the right arrow, which moves you over as opposed to the tab key. Okay, then type in 10% here. Okay, and again you can hit the enter key or hit your right arrow to move you over, and notice that it puts in $33, right? 10% looking at the previous overtime rate. So what we're basically doing is we're saying that on 4/5/2010, Kim Rawls, her standard rate is going to increase to $22 an hour. So now we don't have to worry about how that affects in the schedule. Okay, so as soon as that date turns over, anything that Kim is working on or has been assigned to would immediately be affected in the total cost of the task and, of course, the project as a whole. Okay, definitely some things you're not going to want to have to worry about as a project manager. You want to be able to plug those things in there and then move on. So at this point, go ahead and click OK. This moves us to the talking about cost rate tables, and as I mentioned before, you're going to have instances where you have resources that when they're doing one thing, they're at a certain rate, and when they're doing something different, it's a different rate. Again, taking the model that, or the example that I gave you earlier, relating to the types of work that we have, like instructors and consultants. So let's go back into Steve Masters. So this time we'll double click on Steve Masters. And with Steve Masters open, I want to make sure I'm in the cost tab. Okay, and now I'm going to go over into B, and you notice that you do have a limitation in the number of actual rates that you can store related to a resource. And as you can see here, I have 5 of them. Okay, so while I'm in B, I want to go to the standard rate, and I'm going to type in 125, and then hit the right arrow to get me to 135 here for the overtime rate, and then simply hit the enter key. So here what I'm saying is that when Steve is working on B type work, whatever B represents, which we'll add a note here in a second, then Steve is going to be at 125. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a note to that. So I'm going to click in the Notes tab and just click down there in the Notes area. And I'm just going to type in a simple note here, basically indicating that cost table A is for project management and cost table B is for development. Okay, and simply click OK here. And notice that that note is now hanging out over to the left of Steve Masters, indicating what's basically going on there. Okay, now let's apply some of these different, these different things that we just set in our resource sheet. Let's see how that actually gets applied over when we're doing assignments, as well as talking about how we can place in fixed costs. Okay, so let's move on to the first thing we'll do is let's go to task usage. In the task usage area, we'll see that we are looking at certain columns here. So the first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and bring out the cost table. And we'll do that by going up to View, and then Table, and then over to Cost, because I want to see some cost information here. Right? And you can see that because we have some assignments in this particular schedule, that the total cost has been affected. Right? Just by simply putting in rate information, it automatically shows up. Okay, so make sure that you've dragged the split bar over just enough so that you can see all of the different columns that are going on here. Okay, the first thing you want to do is let's go look for the project manager here. So you can see that for task, I'm on task number 4, and I see that there's an assignment here. In this case, it's the project manager. Okay, what I want to do is I want to select the project manager. Okay, and I want to go up to assignment information, which is right here. Okay, so the assignment information dialog box shows up, and notice that here is my cost rate table. Okay, this is an important view to be in because this view quickly gives you access to the assignment information dialog box. Okay, so there are different areas that you're going to be in order to do that. So I'm now going to associate the B rate to this particular assignment, and I'll click OK. So what I want to be able to do when I'm working with my schedule and my assignments is I want to be able to change the different rates that are in effect for a particular task, and that's how I'm going to do that. Now let's do a fixed cost. So I want to look at task number 5 this time, and because I changed the table, the fixed cost is available to me, and I can click right against that task, and I can simply type in what that fixed cost is and hit the check mark. Okay. Now you'll also notice if I come over to the right that we see the accrual method here. Okay, and I can click on that and I can change what that happens to be. And in this case we want to go ahead and for task number 5, go ahead and set it to end. And this would be important as you work through the schedule because you're going to want to filter by some of this and maybe even perhaps look at some different reporting that's going to take these types of methods into effect. Okay. Let's go ahead and go back to the Gantt chart, following along in our steps here. Okay. And what we're going to do here in the changing it to the Gantt chart is we're going to move back to task usage. So let's go back to task usage. I just want to show you the different ways in which you can navigate around. We went quickly to the Gantt chart. Now we're going back to the task usage. Okay, and a different way in which we can get to the cost information is by right-clicking in the upper left-hand corner. So earlier I had you go to View and Table and look at costs. This time you can just right-click and go into costs here. Okay. So now let's do it to another one. I want to make sure that I'm in costs, and I'm looking for task number 19. Okay, and there's fixed costs. And I'll simply click in there, type in 500, and hit the enter key. I'll go to the accrual method and hit in there again and hit the check mark. Okay, and then let's go back to the Gantt chart. Again, just a couple different ways in which we can get into and work with the different views for associating, in this case, fixed costs. Okay, now let's assign a cost resource type. So let's make sure we're in the Gantt chart, and let's click on task number 3, secure project sponsorship. And in this particular case, there was a flight that Steve Masters took in order to go out and have a meeting with the sponsorship or what have you. So we want to associate that flight cost to this particular task. So with Secure Project Sponsorship selected, go ahead and hit the Assign Resources button, which brings up your Assign Resources dialog box. You're looking for flight, so you're going to click on flight. And before you hit the assignment, you're actually going to put the cost in here. So this flight was $450, so go ahead and type in $450 there in the flight and hit the green checkbox there to enter that in there. And now you'll notice after I hit the close here that you have not only Steve Masters associated to it, but you also have the flight at $450 there.